Hi everyone, happy Tuesday. John here. So I have another book review for you. This book I always used to see, I guess when I was in high school, sort of prominently displayed in the more popular parts of bookstores, like it was sort of almost a literary phenomenon, and I'll talk about that a bit later. And I guess it was for a bit, and of course, as all things phenom do, it eventually sort of had its moment and then went away. The book, it's actually a novel. It's called Embers, and my lack of Hungarian would tell me that the author's name was pronounced Sandor Marai, but apparently a little bit of research online tells me that the pronunciation is probably something more like Shandor Marai. Shandor Marai. Anyway, if that's incorrect and anyone knows more Finno-Ungaric languages than I do, please correct me in the comment section. But this is the book I want to talk about. This originally came out in 2001, the English translation, that is. And it was translated by Carol Brown Janeway. And it caused a bit of a sort of a cause celeb in the book world. Like I said, I remember seeing it everywhere in retail bookstores, even Barnes and Noble and Borders. And it was such a treat because Maroy's life and his work were sort of tragic echoes of his own country's 20th century political mise en scene. And as I already mentioned once, in case you missed it, his home country is Hungary, and that he might join Imre Kirch or the increasingly popular another author that I absolutely love from Hungary by the name of Miklos Banfi as one of the three major contemporary Hungarian writers to join the sort of European pantheon made the occasion of this translation all the more exciting. But on to the actual book itself. There's this class of novel, I think. It's sort of dusted with this. I think everyone will recognize what I'm talking about. Dusted with august lugubriousness and often about betrayal or disillusionment. And sometimes, if you're lucky, written in rather lapidary prose, to which books like the notebooks of Malte Lorid's Riga and Flaubert's Sentimental Education belong. If you throw in the slowly seething revenge that you would see in an English revenge drama, voila, you have Embers. Which, since, like I said, I cannot read in the original Hungarian, I will just chime in as being written by Hungarian's finest prose stylist, Sandor Marai. The subject of disillusionment here is actually a woman. I won't say too much about her or anything else about her, actually. I don't want to spoil the background story around which some of the more interesting parts of the novel revolve. But she seems to be more symbolic of a greater and more substantial loss that the novel is really trying to talk about, which is really the loss of the entire way of life that Marai is writing about. When Marai wrote Embers, which was originally published in Hungarian in 1942 as something, if you translate the original Hungarian title more closely and more accurately, it translates to something like "candles burn down to the nub" or "candles burn to the end." When he originally published this in 1942, at the age of 42, he was only one generation removed from what had been probably the most seismic political event of his early life up until then, and that was the abdication of Koroly V. who was the last king of Hungary in 1918. Before Karolyi's 2-year reign came to an end, the famed emperor Franz Joseph II had fashioned a particular code of honor, moral rectitude, justice, and duty that uniquely defined the rigid military conservatism of his age. And it's easy to see how the two protagonists in this book, both raised in the military, brought up together in the military, friends in the military, might miss the rigidity and the structure associated with Emperor Franz Joseph's reign. To distill the plot, such as it is, does little more than make it sound a bit clunky and awkward and sparse, and it certainly is sparse, but not clunky and awkward. It's about a rich general by the name of Heinrich, who invites a childhood friend by the name of Conrad to dinner after parting with him 41 years earlier under some circumstances that are a little bit murky, and left purposefully so. Since that day, 41 years ago, the general has sort of just sat tight in his castle, contemplated the treachery meted out to him by his friend on the last day that they saw one another on a hunting trip, and just laid low, and enjoyed his retirement. He is a wealthy, aristocratic man who has inherited his parents' castle. Once he arrives from abroad, all Conrad can seem to remember is how thoroughly things have changed. He spent several years in the tropics abroad, and he comes back to Hungary, and all he can see around him is change. Things aren't like they used to be. Remember, the empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, is no longer there when Marai is writing. It is a thing of the past. Slowly, we learn about their lives together, Conrad and Heinrich. We learn about their shared military experience, their friendship that brought them so close, that they were hardly ever seen apart together when they were young. And what begins as a benign conversation slowly turns into this one-sided philosophical exposition by Heinrich on the subjects of love and passion and self-knowledge and friendship, which then morphs yet again into a kind of inquisition of his old friend. And then, to be honest, this part of the book, it's kind of a one-sided monologue that I think Marai would want to be a dialogue, but Heinrich very much dominates it. This part of the book, which is maybe, I guess, the middle 2/3 of the book, or roughly, it has a lot of this sententious moralizing that turns off a lot of readers, especially readers that may not appreciate so-called highbrow or serious literary fiction. So if you're one of those people that's turned off by philosophizing or thinking out ideas in words and doing so rather methodically, this could easily rub you the wrong way as a book. And I can understand why. But I'm not one of those people, and I rather enjoyed the book. So just a warning for people who might not enjoy that sort of thing. Actually, one of my minor reservations about the book was that it was a translation which I find, especially in really great books, seem to do more of a disservice to the original than a service. But Janeway's translation isn't even from the original Hungarian. It's actually a translation of the German translation of the Hungarian. So I mean, that might give you a bit of a case of literary vertigo, but from what I read about the novel, it doesn't really seem to be too much of an issue. There is apparently a bit more of a larger vocabulary to draw from in English, which sort of dissipates the repetitive, incantatory quality of the prose that Marai can sometimes have. But I really can't imagine Marai's language working too much more effectively than Janeway's third-hand translation. Somehow she gets the diction, the subject matter, and the flow of the prose to very nicely parallel and align themselves. Since releasing Embers, Vintage Classics has assured curious readers of Marai, and I hope everyone will be curious to read more after you read this book, that Embers will not be the last of his works they translate into English. Thankfully, Portraits of a Marriage, Esther's Inheritance, Casanova in Bolzano, and The Rebels have all followed suit. Those are the ones that I can find, at least. None of them seem to really have set the literary world ablaze in quite the same way that Embers has, but those with the patience for that unique sort of philosophical novel, for that nostalgic, plangent reading experience that Marai offers, I think can only be a little bit titillated by what these books might have in store for readers. So, if you like something with, it has some gothic elements. Most of it takes place in this castle owned by this aristocratic general. It has its dark and gloomy. It's very much of the cover. It has some very fascinating elements, and it has the virtue of being rather slender, so it won't eat too much of your time. This is Embers by the fairly newly discovered Sandor Marai. I will see you next week with another review, guys. Bye.